Hello friends and lovers, it's Haelian, and today we're going to be going over Fear and the easiest vows to take and in what order to take them, kind of. Of course, there's going to be a lot of subjectivity here, so I would love to hear your thoughts on the different vows and which ones worked easiest for you. But we're going to be going through practically every single vow, and we're going to go through different potential loadouts between 8, 16, 24, and 32 Fear, and then at the very end, we'll go over a handful of builds that might help you for those highest Fear amounts. And with that, let's get started, because I want this to be quick and dirty, and your first Fear I think you should take is Vow of Time at level 1. If you're doing 1 Fear, I think you should start getting used to this now. Now, I understand that's a lot of people that don't like that time pressure. They don't want to take any amount of this. But I think there needs to be some clarity here. So Vow of Time, it only goes while the in-game timer is going. It doesn't run while you're making decisions for boons or while you're in a shop, for instance, you know? So you just got to get used to not lingering in a chamber, going AFK and going and making some coffee after you cleared all the enemies, because unfortunately, the timer's still going that time. Plus, you can always hit the pause button at any point to pause the timer as well. Any point in the game, in a boss fight, in combat, whatever. It's something that's going to be necessary as you climb the fears here, I think. And as long as you don't hit the 9 minutes, there's no downside to this vow. And plus, by the way, if you do hit the 9-minute timer, or any amount of the time here, it just means you start taking 5 damage a second. It's not an instant kill or anything like that. It's 5 damage a second, which is not good, right? But if you do hit it, it's not the end of the world. You know, it doesn't mean that your run is over. And like I said, the sooner you get used to this, I think the easier it's gonna be. And soon enough, it'll feel like nothing to just run even 5 minutes here. But yeah, I think that's gonna be your first Fear. And awkwardly, it's probably gonna be your second and third Fear at the same time. I can understand why you might not want to do the full 5-minute timer, you know, while you're still getting used to it. But you should definitely start at 9 minutes and maybe bump it right up to 7 minutes before you move on. I'll give you some other options later on. Don't worry, I promise, in case you hate it. Next up, I think I'm going to choose Hubris here, and you probably just use them both, honestly. So it does mean that you have to think a little bit about rarity, but probably even more so, all it really means is that you have to think a bit more about magic regen and what aspect you're using, and whether or not you even want to use a lot of magic in the run that you're about to do once you turn on once you turn on Vow of Hubris. Many aspects, like, you might not want to use magic at all for the whole run, in which case Hubris doesn't really matter, you know? Like, a lot of runs you probably want to use some magic, but otherwise it's kind of free, honestly. It's just, like, super easy. Priming magic, kind of not a big deal. So already up to 5 Fear. I mean, it's pretty evenly costed at 1 Fear apiece. After that, I'd probably say you want to turn on Shadow, which can be bad. For some mini-bosses, very select mini-bosses, it can be quite annoying, but overall, it's not too crazy, I think. I think it's kind of fine here to make the mini bosses a little bit harder, essentially. They have a shadow servant, at least. I mean, I think Charybdis is probably the most annoying, but Charybdis is annoying with or without shadow anyway, so just maybe you won't get Charybdis, really. We're up to 7 Fear now, so for the 8th Fear, maybe I'd say something like Vow of Menace at 1, because the foes from the next region, it's just not that bad at the end of the day. You know, we're going for the path of least resistance. Just at the end of the day, it's just not that bad. I know there's 1,000 other options here, but making things more expensive, just not very good. You really don't want Forfeit. Denial is something we'll consider soon. Fangs and Frenzy, those are things that you're definitely going to want to consider soon, but I think these are still the easiest vows leading up to 8 Fear. Now, if we're going to bump it up to 16 right away after this, I think you turn on the second Menace, which is very reasonable. 25% chance of an enemy from the next region. I think that is very cheap for 2 Fear, essentially. After that, it's finally time to probably turn on at least 1 Fang, I think. Maybe even 2. We definitely want to go into Denial soon, although Denial is an annoying vow. It is an easy vow in most ways here. You'd probably want to do something like this. Wait, we were doing 16 Fear, right? So that's 3, that's 3. Okay, you could do something like 1 Frenzy, 1 Fang. Do not do double Frenzy yet. We'll talk about it in a second. Then after that, you could probably do just one of any of these 6 vows up here. Return, Wards, Grit, Pain, Hordes, or Scars. This is where, like, you kind of just fill in a little bit somewhere, I think, is your best option. Whenever you just need 1 or 2 more Fear, just kind of spread it out between these 6 different vows up here, I think. So Frenzy is a hard one to get used to. It is a multiplier. So if you're running 16 Fear and you have Vow of Frenzy on, I would just consider the game 20% harder. And if you have, you know, something like this on, you know, the game is 40% harder. That's one way of looking at it. It's actually quite potent. It's very strong. For some reason, it feels stronger than in Hades 1 with forced overtime. Like, it's hard to really describe, but the enemies, when they say they are faster, they spawn faster, they move faster, they attack faster, including the bosses, and it's quite scary, you know what I mean? Especially once you get up into these rival bosses that we're going to talk about in a second here. So let's take a couple of vows off here, and we'll talk a little bit about rivals, because you get a lot of fear for these. 2 for the first boss, then 3, then 3, then 4. It's a lot. It is a lot. Let's assume that you're just trying to clear, 24 fear will bump it up to. I would not take the 4th rivals here. Now, it kind of depends per route here. I think even up to 32. What I would do is do rivals 3 for the underworld and rivals 2 for the surface, if you're looking to add on some rivals here. I think so. That just comes down to the fact that Cerberus isn't too bad in the underworld relative to the other rival bosses, whereas the Prometheus-Heracles combo is quite devastating. Either way, rivals 4, it's not necessary for beating 32 fear here, I think. In fact, I would say it's probably not optimal. But let's start with the underworld here. So now we've added on rivals. We're already up to 20. You could probably forego Frenzy even one Frenzy here, in order to make it so the rivals bosses aren't too scary now. In fact, now is probably about the time that I would consider using Denial. And if you're still not comfortable doing the 5-minute timer, they could do like 1 Scar. And I personally don't like running with Return. I recognize it's not that bad, but I just don't like doing it. So I'd rather just have a Hordes on, probably, honestly. So this is one 24 fear loadout that you could definitely do. If you really wanted, you could try doing double Fangs, remove the Denial, and maybe turn off a Hordes. That way you're back at 24. Double Fangs isn't too bad, but you do want to consider things like if you have a lot of Hordes and double Fangs, that's pretty scary. Same thing. If you have like a lot of grit, a lot of wards, a lot of return, it makes Fangs scarier, or vice versa, basically. Let's talk about some of these things I haven't really touched yet, namely Forfeit. Forfeit is takeable on the surface. I really wouldn't touch it in the underworld, going all the way up to 32 fear, and probably not even on the surface. Remember, the statue for the surface only requires 24 fear, but maybe I'll kind of talk about it anyway. Forfeit is okay on the surface because that first region isn't too bad since you get so many boons anyway so quickly. So losing out on the first room isn't so bad, but in the underworld, it's quite devastating. I really wouldn't consider it. You can purge the Onion if you have Kronos' Keepsake, but yeah, that's about it. Vow of Debt, it's more of an anti-fun fear I found than anything, because making things potentially 80% more expensive is it just kind of ruins shops for you. You know what I mean? It kind of just ruins it. It does make certain like boons a bit more valuable, like Hermes' Quick Buck, for instance, or Travel Deal maybe. Probably not so much Travel Deal, but Quick Buck definitely gets a lot stronger, I guess, in that sense. But yeah, it's more of it kind of costs a lot of fun. You're subtracting 80% of the fun from the game from not being able to purchase things as much, I would say. Vow of Return, like I said, I find it annoying, but it is very doable. It's 50% at max. It's kind of devastating. Wards can be an easy vow that you could potentially take, but it just depends on the thing that you're trying to go for here. And again, we'll go over some builds that probably work really well for these higher fear amounts, but it kind of depends. Like if you know you're going to go for Aphrodite's cast or Demeter's cast or something like that, wards can be quite lenient. Whereas if you're doing, say, an axe run and you're starting with Apollo's Keepsake to get a nice Apollo attack, wards is going to be really annoying, right? I guess you do got the whirlwinds, but it's going to be quite annoying. Grit is pretty evenly costed, 10% per fear, right? But you just don't want to do too much. Pain is a bit rougher, I think I would say. 20%, 60%, then 100%. I'm not so sure. And Hordes is just 20% per. I wouldn't want to go to 100% scars either way for these runs, that's for sure. There's some like cheesy builds you can do out there. But yeah, I think that looks pretty good for the fears that we hadn't really talked about yet. No, wait. I forgot Vow of Void, but don't even consider it, honestly. I guess if you want to be cheeky and do like a judgment run, you can turn on some Vow of Void. It's not worth it, though. It's not a good strategy. If you want to know like how to beat these higher fears, turning that on and trying to do judgment, it's not a good strategy to try to make the game easier, I'm afraid. All right, it's time. Let's bump this bad boy up to 32, and we'll talk about doing the underworld first here, right? So you got to turn on Denial, I think it's safe to say. You got to turn on at least one Frenzy here, and already it's not looking too terrible. So, for instance, you could do the time if you think you can handle it. You know what I mean? If you think you can handle, I can understand why you might think you cannot, but that's 32 right there, baby. And I don't think this is a bad loadout at all, honestly. 1 Scar, Healing effects are just a little bit less effective, but that's not that big of a deal. I would still run strength for this, by the way, and I'll probably quickly show you my Arcana card setup, which probably doesn't change much, even at 32 fear here. So, yeah, I mean, that's definitely doable. I would not touch Double Frenzy, though. I would not touch Double Frenzy even a little bit, personally. If you don't want to do this all of that time, you might run double debt and then turn on, I'm thinking, maybe like a single wards or something. Maybe you can even do one debt and double wards. Kind of, again, depends on what kind of build you're hoping to complete this with. So this is definitely a reasonable 32 fear loadout, particularly aimed at the underworld, I think we can say. Yeah, I think I'm happy with this. All right, so for the surface, again, why don't we bump it down to 24 for a second here? So I definitely get rid of that. Probably drop a frenzy, and you could drop like a wards and a debt, keep one wards on maybe. That's 24 on the surface. I think the first two bosses are pretty reasonable, particularly with no frenzy on. I think they're pretty laid back. If for some reason you wanted to do 32 on the surface, I think you're going to have to take one frenzy there. You could consider forfeit. I don't know. The timer's a lot tougher on the surface, definitely. It is much harder. The zones are just longer on average, particularly Afira is quite challenging. I'm not sure about forfeit here, to be honest. This is where I could probably use your thoughts on it. You could do something like this, you know. This is definitely doable if you don't like forfeit, which is totally understandable here. I think you'd probably want to do something like that. And again, I think spreading out the vows right here between all of these 6. Just don't take too much of a single one. I wouldn't do like 30% grit, for instance, and then like nothing else up here, personally. I really wouldn't want to do that. I wouldn't do all of scars also, as another for instance here. I know it kind of sucks to take the Nile, and it's kind of anti-fun, and you're going to have to kind of remember it. But remember, you can actually open your codex, and you can see what boons have been crossed out after you've already taken them. It'll show you in your codex which boons have been crossed out. All right, I'm going to try to come up with another option. I talked to my community a lot about this here, too. So let's say you want to do 32 in the underworld, but you just hate Vow of Time for one reason or another here. Maybe you just want to do 0 Vow of Time even, you know? I still don't think I would recommend Rivals Chronos just for beating 32, but it's definitely still doable. We have double Fangs on. I'm trying to keep in mind here. I kind of feel like double Scars certainly isn't bad, and like maybe a Grit. That's a 32 without the timer, I think. If you really hate the timer. Again, I would really recommend getting used to it sooner than later, because once you're used to it, it's free. It feels free. It's not that you're bad at the game. It's really not. It's usually just getting used to the part of knowing when the timer's on, when the timer's off, and taking those moments to either like rest your head, close your eyes, blink a little bit or something like that. And once you get used to that, it's easy, I swear. All right, so I kind of got 2 different builds in mind here that I think would work well, and I'm going to talk about them first before the Arcana cards, I think. So Aspect of Circe, super easy to make a build with. Just start with Zeus' Keepsake, get Storm Ring, get a bunch of other lightning stuff, get Blitz on the attack or the special, get Double Strike. Could consider Static Shock, but it's really not that good in this instance here, you know what I mean? There's some good duos out there like Thermal Dynamics that work really well with Blitz. I have a link to some videos that kind of showcase these builds. It might not be at the fear that you're trying to do, but nevertheless, it's still like a crazy strong build. And one of the big things here is Circe does not use magic, really. Like, there's no good point in using magic. So you could use DDs and take out Tula. You do have to wake up Tula from time to time. Otherwise, you might just want to do Krenos or maybe even Gale if you're trying to do high fear stuff, and you drop your double cast around, you know, and with Storm Ring, and you're just going to deal a lot of damage from that. And then you can stay at a really safe distance if you just use your special after that. It's just so good. Next, of course, I have to mention Aspect of Medea. I know some people don't like it. They think it's clunky. They don't like the way it plays, but I can't deny it's just like really strong when you get used to it. It does take some work. It takes some effort. It takes a little bit of practice to get used to it. But eventually, you could just be doing this between the enemies, and they're just going to die so fast. Put Zeus on your special, you know, try to get a decent attack boon. You know, it could be Hera, it could be Apollo, could be almost anyone, honestly, there. Ares, you know, it practically doesn't matter at that point. And you're just going to have a good time. And again, it doesn't use magic at all, so you don't have to worry about that even in the slightest. You could even consider the Forg here for if you wanted. Now, let's talk about Arcana. For these 2 aspects in particular, something like the Sorceress is not actually a very useful card at all. So you can turn that off, which is kind of a rarity. The Huntress would actually help with Medea a bit, but maybe I would forego that in order to turn on the Lovers in particular, which I think is just kind of a nice thing to have against the bosses here. You might notice I actually have Death Defiances on, so if you like Death Defiances, this is definitely an option that you could choose. You do want the Wayward Son on unless you have 100% Vow of Scars, I think it's safe to say. Persistence is nice. Furies always needs to be on. Swift Runner, it's kind of just on to get, you know, well, I guess nothing actually. You could turn off Swift Runner for this now if you wanted. Yeah, that's another option too, since we have the Death Defiances. Now, if you want to run Strength, and I generally do recommend Strength, I think Strength is good. It's not just for players that are already good at the game, trust me, on this one. It is actually very reasonable, very comparable to the defensive measures that the Death Defiances give you. Yes, I know you don't have the Death Defiances. You can't replenish them later if you so wanted with, say, Athena's Keepsake. There is definitely a larger health pool behind the Death Defiances. I cannot deny that. But the damage reduction and then the plus damage, it's extremely comparable. It's very, very close. Try it out if you haven't already. I think you'll have a good time. So this is a reasonable loadout for both of those aspects. It's kind of fine, I think. Again, you could probably swap that for that. It kind of doesn't matter at that point. It would be nice to get Divinity on here, admittedly, but it's kind of tough. I mean, you could consider turning off Wayward Son, but even if Wayward Son is only healing you for 3 health per chamber, that still feels like kind of a lot to me. It still feels like kind of a lot. It's particularly good with Strength on since you're taking less damage from each hit as well. So you really want Wayward Son on, at least in this particular Fear loadout that we have. So you might have to go without Divinity, I think I would say. All right, I want to finish it off with my 32 Fear loadout that I would probably use, at least for the Underworld here. Definitely, this feels like pretty cozy and comfy to me. I got all 3 time on. But yeah, I think it's not too bad. I gotta, you know, get in the mindset of denial and hubris a little bit when I'm doing a run, when I do finally turn them on for the rarity of it. But then once I kind of get used to it, it's not too bad. You know, I think this is very, very reasonable for what the game has on offer. But that's it. If you want to know more about Fear, if you want to see someone else's perspective, please check out my good friend's Boded's Fear guide over here on YouTube. I have a link in the description that you can go check it out. Also, if you're interested in doing more than 32 Fear, Boded kind of goes over some good layouts for that in particular too. Remember to ask me some questions if anything doesn't make sense to you, or if you just want more detail on anything in particular. I'll do my best to respond. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in another video.